Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kirby Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in and watching today's live streaming. I'm joined by Daniel McAdams, Executive Director of Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Mr. Daniel, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. It's a really pleasure to have you, and also that you dedicated your valuable time for myself and also for the audience of Syriana Analysis. I would like to discuss with you today the ongoing conflict in Palestine, Israel, and your perspective on this very complicated, I would say, conflict, because I would like to hear opinion of a very person who has a long experience in this, unlike myself, let's say, in this regard. And it's also very important for the English speaking people who are following the situation in the Middle East to have a perspective of your perspective on this conflict. So thank you very much for being my guest again.
No, thanks for the invitation, Kevin. I've followed your work for a long time, and I admire it very much.
I really, it makes me happy when I hear such words, especially from a person like yourself. But the situation in the Middle East, in my opinion, now is very dire, and every sane person agrees that the bloodshed in Gaza is horrific and tragic. But there is an ongoing war of narratives, as we can see by the traditional media and also on social media platforms. And there is also blame game from all the sides involved in this conflict. Can you contextualize and tell us your perspective on how do you read this conflict that lots of people in the mainstream and also on the social media platforms say that it started 2-3 weeks ago?
No, it didn't start 2 or 3 weeks ago. Obviously, it started, you could date it back 70 years ago. But I think what this is in its current iteration is just another aspect of the decline of the U.S. and its NATO allies, and it's a decline that's of course started in 2014 with Ukraine. It's continued in the Ukraine war, and what you have with the U.S. and its allies, such as they are, is this absolute lack of realization of the tectonic shifts in the world. And a lot of these shifts have been caused by U.S. foreign policy. Ironically, the changing in the Middle East, which nobody seems to notice in the U.S. I mean, it's shocking to see Washington's policy community going on as if this is just another crisis they can manage. Oh, we'll drop a few bombs on Syria last night because they shot a couple rockets at our illegal bases, and it'll just all come fine. But it's not fine. The world has changed significantly. Alistair Crook, who I admire very much, wrote a great piece in Strategic Culture Foundation where he talked about this is the second half of the busting of the myths. The myth of NATO's invulnerability has been busted by the Ukraine war. It no longer has that facade of being this alliance that's capable of projecting strength across the world. And then the second part of that is the myth of Israeli invincibility. And this is not me. This is Alistair Crook, but I agree with it completely. Israel has had to maintain this image of being able to protect Israeli Jews against anything, and that has utterly failed, and it's also been exposed as a paper tiger. So when you have these two like world-defining myths explode within 2 years of each other, then you see really how the world is changing, and everyone seems to understand it except Washington, D.C. and the European capitals.
Taking from what you said, Mr. Daniel, you said there is a lack of awareness in Washington by the politicians or the elite. Where does this lack of awareness come from? Is it arrogance? Is it not realizing the changes in the world? And also, you mentioned the airstrikes on Syria last night. How can the United States defend itself on Syrian soil? This is a question because they say they acted in a self-defense.
Well, that's like if you come in and you put a gun to my head and kick me out of my house. It's not self-defense if you're trying to keep me from coming back into my house. And that's exactly what, as I'm sure your viewers are very, very well aware, the U.S. has been doing in Syria since 2011, when the United States and Israel and the U.S. allies backed Al-Qaeda and ISIS to overthrow the secular government of Assad in Syria. And they still can't get over that. A lot of this is driven by U.S. neocons, and they can never get over a loss. And everything they do, of course, is a loss because they have never done anything right. Everything they touch turns to dirt, but they can never get over it. They seethe with anger. And so when it's apparent that the U.S. and the neocons have lost in Ukraine, well, let's go ahead and put a match to the gasoline can in the Middle East. I mean, this is how they operate. And so you asked about what motivates the so-called experts in D.C. A lot of it is hubris. You're right. A lot of it is, and I spent 12 years working in D.C. As a foreign affairs advisor to Congressman Ron Paul. So I dealt with these people constantly. There is an arrogance. There's an elitism. There's a lack of intellectual curiosity. I would go to meetings of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Foreign Relations Committee, and you would see all of the other staffers, and they all had their little booklets of things they were reading, and they were inevitably the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. This is the only thing where they rely on. So you have this huge echo chamber in D.C. when it comes to foreign policy, and of course that is fueled to a large degree by the military-industrial complex, who owns the think tanks. They pay the think tanks. They own the papers directly or indirectly. So this is sort of this internally sealed chamber that everyone is thinking in. And so when someone like, a Ron Paul, for example, like when we come into a committee hearing with antiwar.com articles, it's as if we had showed up naked. Nobody knows what to do. So that's the real problem. There's no creative thinking. Anyone who does think creatively is banned, is kicked out, is not listened to. So it's a real problem.
You mentioned the neocons in Washington, D.C., and you know that the U.S. has sent now warships and also aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean. There are some in the Red Sea, there are some in the Arabian Peninsula or the Persian Peninsula. And my question here would be, do you really think that all these warships and special forces are coming to the Middle East to quote unquote deter Hezbollah, or there is a bigger intention here? Because I will be very honest with you, I've been digging into this, into the rabbit hole and asking people around. And my sources in Damascus say that they're very alarmed by this, and they think that the Americans, if this war expands, they will hit Damascus and also probably hit President Assad himself. I tried to double check this information in Washington, D.C., and I have a friend who has good connection with a guy who has his contacts in the CIA, and they were affirming this information that there is an intention now to finish the Syrian war once and for all. Then they consider it an unfinished business. So the question would be, do you really think that all these warships are coming to the Middle East only for to deter Hezbollah and destroy Hamas, or is it also directed to Syria and Iran?
I mean, if you think about the scale of what the U.S.'s military is doing, this mobilization of, I think, a total of 4 carrier groups and hundreds of cargo planes constantly flying back and forth to the region, depositing troops, depositing weapons. This is a scale that, we haven't seen since maybe the first Gulf War, the run up to the first Gulf War in 1990. And what I find most astonishing about this is that, I mean, in a serious country, you would have Congress asking questions. What the hell is going on here? What are you doing? Where do you get this authority? What is the mission? But nobody is saying a thing. Nobody is raising a peep to something that could. I mean, President Putin of Russia said it just today. I think he said this conflict has every possibility of expanding outside of the Middle East region, and I think he obviously is not given to bluff. We know that from his past behavior. So I think he understands, as you know, they have bases in Syria, and they understand that they would probably come under fire as well. And what kinds of obligations might they have to their partner Iran if Iran is attacked? So no, I don't buy the idea that the U.S. is mobilizing a massive amount of military materiel just to deter Hezbollah. That doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I believe so too. And it seems there are indications to increase the pace of this conflict in the Middle East, despite the talks of ceasefire now mediated by Qatar. And today I was reading at least 7,326 Palestinians have been killed by Israel since October the 7th. Al Jazeera said today, just an hour ago, that negotiations mediated by Qatar and a ceasefire and prisoner exchange deal are progressing and at an advanced stage, according to Al Jazeera, which is owned by Qatar itself. Do you think the U.S. and Israel will agree on a permanent ceasefire after the recent American veto in the UN Security Council that blocked the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip?
I don't think that's coming yet. I mean, I hope I'm wrong. I'm hoping that Israel and the U.S. will listen to reason, but I don't see that happening. I mean, Israel also. I mean, I saw a recent poll, I think last week or a few days ago at least, that 80% of Israelis blame Netanyahu for the attacks on October 7th. There are plenty of internal divisions within Israel as well. And if you listen, if you have the misfortune of listening to a lot of the Israeli politicians lately, they are braying for blood. I mean, they want to flatten Gaza. And so Netanyahu, he's being pulled in one direction by the more extreme voice. I'd never thought, I mean, I've followed Netanyahu since 96 when he was first elected. I never thought I'd see a day where he actually looks like a moderate, if not a liberal. But that's the state of internal Israeli politics. And it's just been fed by this October 7th event, which still, I think, has a lot of unanswered questions. Let's just put it that way. But you have the situation where they're not ready for it yet. And then if you're more cynical, I was at an event in DC earlier this week talking to someone about it, and he said, well, Israel likes to have a 10-to-1 kill ratio. So when they get to about 10 times as many Palestinians as Israelis were killed, then maybe the world will start paying attention. Cynical, but probably true. But
maybe then Ben Shapiro would be happy about that.
Yeah, well, I don't know. He'd probably go for 100-to-1. But he's not going to suit up, though. I don't think he's too busy. But yeah, I don't see it happening. This time is different. And Alistair Crook and many others that I read have talked about the fact that this time, the Arab world, the Muslim world, you see cooperation between Shia and Sunni that you have not seen before, certainly for a long time. You see coordination between Hamas and Hezbollah. Most Americans have no idea that they have been historically backed by two completely different factions. And I'm sure your listeners know better than I about it. But they're all getting together, and the moderates in the region are being pushed out. They're becoming irrelevant, and they're feeling much more pressure. And the Arab Street is no longer in the Middle East anymore. The Arab Street is in Paris. It's in Scandinavia. It's in Germany. It's in the U.S. So this is a conflict. It's now a conflict unlike any previous that I've seen. And I remember probably very vaguely back to the 73 war.
You mentioned at the beginning the lack of awareness, and I would like to mention like people, it seems, in DC or the so-called mainstream journalists haven't followed the Syrian war, and they haven't seen the involvement of Hezbollah in this conflict and the urban warfare experience that they have gained in Syria against the most vicious terrorist groups in the world. They haven't followed that Hezbollah has become an army of over 100,000 soldiers. They are ideologically driven and religiously driven, and at the same time they have sophisticated weaponry. Unlike Hamas, they have precision missiles, they have anti-tank rockets, they have anti-aircraft also systems, and even the anti-ship cruise missiles. And in my humble opinion, somebody that I followed Hezbollah since 2006, I think if Hezbollah intervenes in this conflict, the entire north will fall in the hands of Hezbollah, and people will see that what happened on the 7th of October, it will be just a kid's playbook compared to what Hezbollah can do. So there are so many people speaking about like Hamas and Hezbollah, like they can annihilate them like this. No, they cannot. The situation has changed in the region, and if we compare it to the 1967 war, when Israel occupied Gaza Strip, occupied the West Bank, occupied the Sinai and the Golan Heights in 6 days. And now they have been, how many days? It's 20 days, almost 17 days. They have been massing their forces to go after Hamas. And they still need special forces from the United States, special forces from Germany stationed in Cyprus, and also warships coming from Australia, and their special forces are also coming to the region. So in my opinion, they're underestimating also the power of the regional players, whether they're state or non-state actors, in inflicting pain on the US and its allies in the region. But since we're speaking about the ceasefire, it is people are asking me, even if there is a ceasefire, how do we trust the US, which is Israel's main backer? And I would like to show you this video of John Kirby and the difference of statement and approach between Ukraine and Palestine. And I want your comment on this, please.
It's hard to look at what he's doing in Ukraine, what his forces are doing in Ukraine, and think that any ethical, moral individual could justify that. It's difficult to look at the it's difficult to look at some of the images and imagine that any well-thinking, serious, mature leader would do that. So I can't talk to his psychology, but I think we can all speak to his depravity.
This is war. It is combat. It is bloody. It is ugly, and it's going to be messy. And innocent civilians are going to be hurt going forward. I wish I could tell you something different. I wish that wasn't going to happen, but it is going to happen.
What's your take when you listen to John Kirby and his acting skills?
The crocodile tears. It's incredible. I mean, American foreign policy is always about projectionism. They always project on others that which they themselves are guilty of. So when someone like John Kirby talks about depravity, it's because he's actually depraved. He's a depraved person. That's how it is. And the irony is, I mean, the U.S. doesn't understand that the rest of the world sees this. How many millions of people, and I saw this clip yesterday, how many millions of people around the world will look at this clip and say, this just reaffirms, the depravity of U.S. foreign policy. Some lives mean more than others. Well, the fact of the matter is, we know that there weren't the kinds of images coming out of Ukraine that are coming out of Gaza every day, because if there were, we'd be seeing them on our TV screens. They would have been plastered in front of us for a year and a half, and they haven't been. In fact, the biggest critics of Putin are the fact that he did not go in hard enough, because he's tried to preserve civilian lives. Gets no credit for that. But you talked about the underestimation of Hezbollah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, any glance at what they've achieved from 2006 until now, the fighting skills, the weaponry, but it's the exact same situation, because we saw for a year and a half the quote unquote experts in Washington saying Russia's running out of missiles. They've only got 5 left. Russia will. I mean, these are quote unquote serious people like Edward Luttwak, who was saying in the first weeks, well, this is the end of Russia. Russia's going to lose. These people are wrong every single time.
They keep their jobs.
They keep their jobs. Well, look at Victoria Nuland. She screws up the world and she gets a promotion. I mean, Unfortunately, I wish I hadn't picked foreign affairs to go into, because it's the only profession where you can be wrong every single time and get a promotion. But if it turns out that you're right, you get kicked in the teeth. So.
I'm planning of writing a book. The title, I Told You So. Since 12 years, since 13 years since the eruption of the war in Syria and this regime change, I've been telling, like, I come from Syria and I know how this political and security structure in Syria is built since 45, 50 years. And if you really think that Assad's days are numbers in 3 months, because at the beginning of the war, these people, serious people, as you mentioned, including, by the way, serious people who were my professors and my supervisors in academia, they were telling me, what are you doing? Why are you giving statements to the media? He is going in, like, maximum, the Americans told us in 3 months, like literally the Americans were reaching out to professors and people in academia in Syria and telling them, look, if you want to preserve your future career as in academia and in politics, shut up, because he's living in 3 months. And I was like, I was just a kiddo, 22 years old. I was like, how do these people think that Assad is going to live in 3 months? And now it's the same thing happened in Ukraine, that Russia is going to be in its own Afghanistan again in Ukraine, despite the difference of the geography and the type of urban warfare in Ukraine, and even the type of the Russians said this is a special military operation. They didn't say it is an all-out war. And the military tactics that they have used, the grabbing the land slowly, it doesn't indicate that they have an interest in carpet bombing areas like the US did in Raqqa and in also now Israelis did in the Gaza Strip. So these people, in my opinion, they live in a wishful thinking, and they're living in a bubble, but this bubble is very harmful. And it's harming the people in the region. I mean, how many hundreds of thousands of people will die till these so-called think tankers and experts in DC understand that they are actually killing people in the Middle East?
Yeah, this is the real danger. Pardon me, because, and in U.S. foreign policy, we never experience the effects of our policy. Nobody has to go live in Libya now. That's already gone and forgotten. It was forgotten a week or so later. So there are no repercussions, and so that's why you have all these armchair warriors trying to out militarize each other and to talk tough. People like Lindsey Graham, right? Who one backfire of a car and he'd be diving, for safety. It's a joke, but they never have to experience it. And Dr. Paul does a weekly column, and he wrote this week, and I think it's a very good one, is that by the U.S. becoming militarily involved in this conflict, we're basically setting the stage for innumerable 9/11s in the future, because blowback is real. We should have learned the lesson from the first 9/11. So many people thought we did, but here we go, doing it, repeating it all over again, repeating the mistakes all over again. Pardon me. And the world is different now. It's not contained in the Middle East region. We have a lot of immigrants here. I'm not saying that that casting aspersions on them. But when you have this kind of anger of people who have lost their children, I mean, even for God's sake, Justin Amash, former U.S. representative, lost his family. They were hiding in an Orthodox church in Gaza and blown up by the Israelis. This kind of anger, if the Americans could just put themselves in the shoes of the people that they're liberating, they might start having some self-awareness. But that doesn't happen yet. And I'm afraid it's not going to happen, Kevork, until there is a complete and total crash. Maybe it'll be an economic clash or a total military defeat. But one of those two are inevitable, I think.
Do you agree with me, Daniel, that we know, like, I still remember the environment after post, let's say, 9/11, and it seems like a little bit similar now, the environment in the media and what they're trying to portray to people, again, especially the Muslim communities around the world. But also, after 9/11, Europe tried to play some independent role, right? There was a fine line between the foreign policy of Europe as a collective Europe and the United States. Nowadays, we cannot distinguish between the foreign policy of Europe as the EU, let's say, and the United States. Don't you think this will have its own repercussions in the Middle East and North Africa, in a way that people of the region are not stupid? The people see that the Europeans and the Americans are now hand in hand. They are spilling this blood in the Gaza Strip, and this will create an environment, a mistrust environment, that the people will never trust the so-called collective West again.
It does make you wonder about European leaders, and I know for a fact the U.S. meddles in elections. I used to be an election observer in Europe when I lived there for 7 years, so I know very well how it works. You're right. In the Iraq War, I mean, if people don't remember this, maybe younger people don't, but France was completely against it. You had the Germans, a completely different German government. You had Gerhard Schröder, who was not in favor of it. You had a very, very healthy European opposition to what the U.S. was doing. And you don't have that now. There is no opposition. Instead, Europe is led by zeros, by nobodies. Olaf Scholz is a nobody. He has no thoughts of his own. Macron has no thoughts of his own. His brilliant idea is, hey, let's create a new anti-ISIS coalition and go after Hamas. I don't know who told him that in the one morning, but that's what he came up with. I mean, these people are absolute ciphers. In my opinion, there's only one person in Europe with any sense, any courage, any intelligence, and that's Viktor Orban in Hungary, who has consistently, at least when it comes to Ukraine, said, we want no part of this. We say no. You can't transport weapons through our territory. We'll have nothing to do with sending weapons. We don't want to be any part of it. And for that, of course, he's been completely demonized. Speaking of zeros, you have someone like von der Leyen, who is probably one of the dumbest people on earth, unelected, who's running around, giving foreign policy advice, it's an overused word, but it's just a clown show.
Daniel, doesn't scare you the fact that these people are really incompetent and they may cause further troubles around the world? Like you mentioned few names already. To be honest with you, I am scared to death because this incompetence will definitely lead into hard times for the Europeans themselves here to begin with. And when I read the statements or watch the statements of these politicians, I wonder with myself if they really mean what they say, or they have a script and that they have to follow. Because if it's a script, it's still better than really meaning what they are trying to say. Because if they really mean what they say, then a very hard times are expected for Europe in the near future. Dark times, I would say.
That's true. Stupid or evil is the question. Let's go for stupid. I guess it would be better. But the U.S. is led by people. And I spent a lot of time working on Capitol Hill, with very few exceptions. The members of Congress are extremely ill-informed. They have no curiosity. They have a herd mentality. They're infected by, ironically, and someone posted this the other day, ironically, the U.S. has become sort of a theocracy. They're infected by religious extremism. Someone did a series of interviews where they talked about what is driving U.S. policy in the Middle East.
I saw that.
You saw that. It was incredible,
Oh,
incredible.
God.
I mean, this is a theocracy.
Yeah.
when you have people in power who are actively trying to bring about the end of the world for their own personal religious views, you're living in a nut house. And I hesitate to criticize other people's religious views because I have my own views. But these kind of affect other people. Wanting the end of the world does affect the rest of us. So sorry, guys, we're not going to go along with it.
Guys, Daniel is speaking about the video that I showed you yesterday when they were asking few people in the Senate or in the Congress what do they think about the U.S. foreign policy toward Israel, and they were saying, one of the ladies said that God created the United States and Israel, and I'm loyal to both. And this is one of the questions I wanted to ask you. What's wrong with the evangelical Christians and with their obsession with Israel? And do they know that their policies are harming the Christians of the Middle East? Look what happened to Iraq. 90% of the Christians were expelled after the war. 90% of the Armenian Christians after the war, those are the concrete estimates in Syria, had to flee the country, including so many Christians as well. And do they see what the US foreign policy is doing to the Christians of the Middle East, or do they not consider them Christians to begin with?
I mean, they have sort of a Leninist outlook in a strange way. You've got these people are dispensable because we have the inevitable march of history, and that's just how it goes. But what's taken over, and again, I don't like to talk about religion, but what's taken over is kind of a heretical sect of U.S. Protestantism, and my friend Tom Woods tweeted about it a few days ago, which is the Protestantism that these people are espousing would be completely alien to people like Luther, Cranmer, all of these like sort of great minds of the Reformation would not recognize the Protestantism that is being espoused by U.S. evangelicals. And I'm sure your viewers and listeners know that a lot of this came about in the late 19th century with the emergence of the Scofield Bible, the Scofield annotated Bible, which is where all of these things came in. If people study the history of that, they'll realize it's sort of an heretical sect of U.S. Christianity that's somehow taken hold, and it's a very, very dangerous thing. Again, I personally don't care what people do for their own religious practices in private, and just like they do in their personal lives. I don't care, but when it affects the rest of the world, then it's time to stand up and say something about it.
I want to show you what Nikki Haley said recently, I think yesterday, and it strikes me a lot what she said here. She says, give Israel whatever they need, whenever they need it, no questions asked. Let's check what she said here.
We should be doing three things. One, support Israel, whatever they need, whenever they need it, no questions asked. Two, eliminate Hamas. Don't weaken them, eliminate them, because if we don't, we'll do this again. And three, do whatever it takes to get our hostages home. But see the bigger picture of all of this. There would be no Hamas without Iran. And look at what the bigger story of this all is. You have China and Russia name themselves unlimited partners. Iran is their junior partner. China is importing all of its oil from Iran, sending billions of dollars their way that they support terrorism with. Russia's getting drones and missiles from Iran. Look at the three. What do they all have in common? They all want to destroy the West, and they all hate America.
I've been also seeing the statements of what was his name, DeSantis. I feel like there is a contest for who is more pro-Israel among the candidates in the U.S. And also, do you agree with me that there is? I do not remember that there is any other country whose candidates run for presidency, warmongering against other country, like trying to prove that they are more of a bulldog than his competitor in his candidate competitor. It's like they're competing with each other, who is more pro-Israel and who is more warmonger, whether it's against Russia or China.
I wouldn't say competing to be more warmonger. I would say competing to be more stupid. And it's hard to say which of those two are more stupid, which is a shame because I like DeSantis on some of his domestic policies, particularly fighting against the COVID tyranny. But the guy's off his rocker when it comes to foreign policy. Nikki Haley is not a serious person. Yeah, we all know that Hamas was started and funded by Iran. Okay, I'm sorry you failed the history test. Go back and rewrite your paper. We know that's not true. Anyone
Yes.
with a cursory understanding of the region knows that's not true. China is buying Iranian oil. Well, why is that? It's because you're sanctioning Iran, you idiot. They're gonna sell it. It's a world market. Someone's gonna buy it. The Indians, the Iran or the Chinese, they're loving it. They're getting all this oil at a good price. The same with Russian oil. So
But the smartest are the Europeans. They're buying the Russian oil recycled from China and from India.
at a markup. Yeah, you gotta love the Indians. They're smart people. But the whole this you say competing to be more pro-Israel, and you're right on the surface. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these people, whether they are conscious enough to understand it or not, they are using Israel just like the neocons used Ukraine, because the prize is Russia. They claim to love Israel so much, but they would stand by and have Israel completely destroyed as long as they can get to their prize, Iran. That's what they really want. There's no way that if they continue pushing this, there's no way that Israel is going to come out ahead on this. It's going to be a horrible, bloody war of Israel against everyone in the neighborhood who's been irritated and infuriated over decades at Israel's behavior and just waiting for their time for revenge. And I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing. I support it or I oppose it, but it's just a fact. So the people in the U.S. who are pushing this, thinking they're pro-Israel, if I was an Israeli, I would say, just shut up, take it easy. We don't need this.
I will play a very short video. Since we were speaking about how smart, quote unquote, some of the politicians are in the West, and she's the head of the Bundestag, so the Federal Parliament Defense Committee. She's the head of the Bundestag Defense Committee, Marie Agnes Strack-Zimmermann, and she says the Russian attack on Ukraine and the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel are directly related. She says this was on Putin's birthday in October 7. This is not a coincidence. Take a look.
Und man muss eines klar machen, diese beiden Konflikte, diese beiden Angriffe, Russlands Angriff auf die Ukraine, der terroristische Angriff der Hamas auf Israel, hängt unmittelbar zusammen. Im Übrigen war das am Tag von Putins Geburtstag, der 7. Oktober. Das sind alles keine Zufälle.
So she's literally saying that the attack of Hamas on Israeli settlements was not a coincidence because it came on the birthday of Vladimir Putin. So both wars are correlated. She's the head of the Bundestag Defense Committee.
It's hard to reckon with such stupidity. I remember the Germany of Helmut Kohl and Helmut Schmidt. When there were serious people running this country, and it ran, like clockwork. And now the place is falling apart. Wait till this winter, and maybe if the AfD wins the elections, some common sense will return, but certainly not under these people. It's almost laughable. It is laughable. We're just laughing at it.
Yeah. I think the people here in Germany, they're also laughing, and the polls show clearly that they're not satisfied with the current status quo in Germany, whether it is related to Ukraine, and especially after blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines, and the German government's they're not following this case, right? They're not asking for investigation, and their allies conducted their own investigation, and they don't want to share the results of the investigation with them. And they even the German press smeared Seymour Hersh. They called him a blogger here. So it's like a suicide mission, right? You can see that Germany is shooting its own leg, and the politicians here aren't really serving the interests of the Germans. This is my humble opinion. It's a criticism. I'm not attacking Germany, guys. I'm just criticizing the behavior and the policy of the politicians, and I do not see that this policy is serving the interests of the Germans. Daniel, I would like to end this conversation with you with one more video, and this time let's see this together because it's all correlated nowadays. This is Mitch McConnell. He says he's one of the most influential politicians in Washington. Without putting a hand to his mouth, the 81-year-old admits in an interview that the real winner of the Ukraine war was the arms industry in the US. Let's take a look.
If you look at the Ukraine assistance, let's talk about where the money's really going. A significant portion of it's being spent in the United States in 38 different states replacing the weapons that we sent to Ukraine with more modern weapons. So we're rebuilding our industrial base.
That's what President Biden's seeking to do.
It's correct. No Americans are getting killed in Ukraine. We're rebuilding our industrial base. The Ukrainians are destroying the army of one of our biggest rivals. I have a hard time finding anything wrong with that. I think it's wonderful that they're defending themselves. And also the notion that the Europeans are not doing enough. They've done almost $90 billion. They're housing a bunch of refugees who escaped. I think that our NATO allies in Europe have done quite a lot.
You sound like you have a lot in common with President Biden and his worldview, based on what you just laid out.
Well, not on the domestic side, but on this issue that we're discussing today, we're generally in the same place.
So apparently the military-industrial complex in the US is quite happy with the arms deals in Ukraine, and they're filling their pockets. But this was taboo to speak when the war started in Ukraine, and people were called conspiracy theorists when they pointed out to the fact that Americans or the politicians and the elites in the US are using the Ukrainians as cannon fodders. In your opinion, what happened to the Ukraine war? We do not hear anything about the Ukraine war anymore. There is nothing on the mainstream press. Everybody is focusing on the Palestine-Israeli conflict.
Yeah, it's just like as soon as they killed Gaddafi and destroyed the country, you didn't hear about Libya again. I mean, I think McConnell is one of the most despicable, cynical people on earth. And the idea that 500,000 dead Ukrainians just don't matter because we didn't lose an American. It's kind of a supremacist ideology that, frankly should be alien to Americans. But you're right. He admits that it's a money laundering scheme. We get rid of our old junky weapons, and then we rob working class Americans to get shiny new weapons and further enrich the military industrial complex. The rich people who live around the Beltway get that much richer in either through taxation or more accurately, the depreciation of the value of the dollar. It's the working and the poor who pay through the inflation tax. Everything costs more. Their dollar goes less and less and less strength. So this is all on the backs of the poor to further enrich the rich of the United States, among whom is McConnell and the people who are in DC, who continue to get richer and richer off of our aggressive foreign policy.
Yes. Daniel, it's a really pleasure to have you on my channel. We can discuss about these cases, in my opinion, for days if we want so. And some of the commentators were saying kudos to you for participating in my relatively small YouTube channel. So thank you very much for your time. And guys, the recent live streamings that I'm doing, they're reaching around between 5,000 to 6,000 views. I think they're not bad. But if you can share this video with your friends, I think this was very, very insightful chat with Daniel McAdams. And if we can reach to 10,000, I would really appreciate that. And also give a follow to Daniel. I put his X or Twitter link in the description below. Do you like to promote some other work of yours, Daniel? Where can people find your work except on Twitter?
Yes, we do a daily Ron Paul Liberty Report. It's live on Rumble at noon Eastern Time. Dr. Paul and I do it Monday through Thursday, and on Friday it's a financial show. So I hope your viewers might tune into our show as well.
So what I'm going to do now, when we finish this chat, please send me the link of the channel, and I will put it again in the description below, so that, guys, you also please subscribe to their channel on Rumble. Rumble is very important, guys. I'm broadcasting on YouTube and Rumble at the same time, but Rumble is very important. I already put the link in the description below, because very soon this channel also will be deplatformed like others. So let's go there before we are canceled. Daniel, thank you very much again for your time.
Thank you so much.